The Georgia Bulldogs have the second best odds to win next year's national championship, the national championship in 2026. They have the second best odds to win this past season, so just keep that in mind. And these are one of those futures odds. This is according to FanDuel. They are tied for second in odds with Texas, and behind, guess who? All right, I'll give you like 3 seconds to guess. Ohio State. Ohio State has the best odds to win the national championship next season. They had the best odds to win the national championship this season. Starting to look like that might be what happens, right? We're just a few days away from Notre Dame and Ohio State's matchup for the national championship in Atlanta, the one that Georgia fans wanted to be at with the Dogs and the red and black being there. That's not the case. So it's time to move on to next season. Just look, it's way too early. It's January. We haven't even gotten to spring. I'm not sure if the staff is complete, right? There haven't been any staff moves for Georgia, so there hasn't been an offseason where there hasn't been at least one staff change under Kirby Smart. So expect at least one move to happen at some point, you would think. We still don't, know what Georgia's final roster will be. I think that in this day and age of college football, it's still too early to know, but you look at the programs that are on this list. Ohio State is first plus 450, Texas plus 650, tied with Georgia and Oregon. I misspoke. Oregon also has plus 650. Penn State plus 850. Notre Dame plus 100. So a lot of the teams that got pretty far in this year's college football playoff national championship, they're getting penciled in as the favorites to win ahead next season. Alabama, Tennessee, Clemson, Ole Miss, LSU, A&M. A string of Clemson and SEC schools right after that. Michigan, South Carolina, Miami. Those are the teams that you're seeing on this list as programs that, Vegas, the odds makers think that have a chance to win next season. So what do we know about Georgia's team? What do we actually know about the Georgia Bulldogs so far? Ryan Kelly from Dawg Post talking about championship odds. It's funny because for me, I talk about these things a lot, and but that's what it is. To me, odds are a talking point. Spreads are a talking point. I never seriously look at these things and think, well, that's the end-all, be-all. And I know that maybe that's just common sense, but when a team's favored by 5.5, I get it. We pick those games. I've got to make my decision on that, and it's fun. There's a lot of fun in it, but to me, those numbers don't mean anything, especially when it comes to Georgia. Georgia and Kirby have disproven spreads time and time again and have found a way to either not cover the spread or to destroy the spread. I feel like in a lot of Georgia games, you don't see it actually end up being close to what the prediction was. I don't know what to make of these odds, if we're being quite honest. I think that if you look at them, a lot of it's based off of things that happened this season, and that's true. But Ohio State, rightfully so, had, to me, the best odds to win the national championship this year, and that very well might happen in a few days here. I think that when you look at that roster and you look at Ohio State and you think about how stacked it was from top to bottom, and they're just not going to have a lot of that next season. Now, they replenish and they do a good job of that, but the structure of this season, the one thing that Ohio State has going for it is it has the best player on probably defense and offense in college football. You can make the case for it at least. Caleb Downs on defense, the safety, Jeremiah Smith on offense. Outside of that, there's a lot of the production and a lot of the talent that's going to be going off to the league. They get to stay. They're not eligible to leave for the draft. Texas. Why is Texas up there with Georgia? Why is Texas up there ahead of everybody that's not Georgia and Oregon? Arch Manning, Steve Sarkisian, talent, the cycle there. I think Arch Manning is going to hold a lot of weight in a lot of conversations. I would love to see what the Heisman odds are. I know that those are not getting finalized as we still don't know who some of the people in college football are going to be. But Arch Manning, to me, is probably carrying a lot of weight for Texas in this thing. And rightfully so. Rightfully so. I think Texas has a good machine rolling. Georgia. But what we know about the Dogs is we know Gunnar Stockton is probably going to be the quarterback. At the moment, the staff's the same, so let's operate as if it is going to be the same, even though I think there probably will be a change or two. I don't know exactly to what, but there probably will be a change or two. It's an offense that's getting revamped, right? The offensive line is going to be very new. Just 4 of the 5 starters are going to be replaced. A couple of guys that have experience are going to be in there starting. There's no Trevor Etienne. You've got a young running back room, and Cash Jones is not as young, but is part of that. And then the revamped wide receivers. So I say revamped. This offense is going to look a lot different next season. And I think that people are projecting it and making the assumption, and assumptions aren't great in this industry, but it's part of it, making the assumption it's going to be better. The truth of the matter is Georgia's offense 10 years ago, 15 years ago, kind of blah, right? And it's all about the run. And there's some blah is not a great way to put it, but not a high-powered offense, right? Not this electric offense. It started getting electric over the last few years, and Todd Monken sparked that. The talent that Georgia had sparked that. Dual-threat ability of Stetson Bennett sparked that. But when you have A.E. Mitchell and Ladd McConkey and James Cook and DeAndre Swift over the last few years, guys like that, DeAndre Swift's a bad example because he wasn't quite in that timeline. But, Zamir White and Brock Bowers, the offense has the opportunity to be electric. I think that the expectation is that Georgia's going to get back to that next season. Because what happened was Georgia was scoring around 40 points per game the last few years and did get 40 points per game in at least one of the seasons. But they dropped off this year. Georgia offense dropped off, and they scored about 32 points per game, which is not awful, but it's not as good as 40. And you look at this year's schedule, in crunch time games, we're talking about them scoring 22 against Texas, 10 against Notre Dame, 13 against Kentucky. I was just looking at all these scores. There were plenty of, a handful of instances this year where the offense was really stalled. I think that part of what goes into these odds changes so much is there is this assumption, hey, it didn't work necessarily last season with Carson Beck. The receivers weren't great. Mike Bobo, there's definitely a lot of heat on him. I think that probably at least a little bit of it is justified. And to me, there's an assumption that Gunnar Stockton's going to be better. Zachariah Branch is going to change the offense, that Nate Frazier. I think we're working with a lot of assumptions. I think that some of them are probably true. And to me, that's a big reason why. People don't necessarily worry about Georgia's defense. I look at Georgia's defense and I have questions. I do have questions about it. I have questions on whether or not this defensive line is going to be better or worse. And there's a certain point where my question is to Kirby. If a new group comes in on the offensive line, if a new group comes in at receiver, a new group goes in at their front seven. If you're not familiar, Georgia's front seven is going to be nearly entirely replaced in terms of the starters. The wide receiver room is going to be a lot different. The offensive line is going to be a lot different. If these groups come in and perform really, really well, and it's just a lot different, and then click, why were some of those guys out there in the first place? That's my question to you, Kirby. If you come across this and you get halfway through this video, I know you love watching them, that would be what I ask. I failed to mention that Georgia scored 10 points against Ole Miss, right? There was another one, another clunker. So it's going to be different. We really don't know if it's going to be better or worse. There's a lot of optimism in all this, and so people like to think they'll be better on the offensive side of the ball. But on the defensive side of the ball, like I said a minute ago, I have questions. I have questions about whether guys like Joseph Jonah, Gabe Harris, is everybody ready to step up? Because Chas Chambliss is gone, and he's been around for a long time. Dan Jackson's gone, and he's been around for a long time. Malachi Stark, Smile Mondon. Guys that were staples of this defense are gone. And this happens every single year, but it feels like we're really starting to turn away from the back-to-back national championships. Now, in 2025, that would have been 2 seasons prior when that happened, and we're starting to move away from that. Georgia's getting the respect that it's earned by being at the top of these odds. And look, you can pose all sorts of questions for a lot of the other teams. Penn State's up there. They got Drew Aller returning. People expect them to cycle in on defense. A lot of good defensive talent will be leaving them. Notre Dame, I don't think they'll have Riley Leonard, right? They'll have Jeremiah Love. Alabama, still not 100% sure who their quarterback is going to be. So there are still a lot of questions around the country that need to be answered. With Oregon, Dylan Gabriel's going to be out of the picture. They're going to change things. We're going to really see what kind of machine Dan Lanning has rolling over there now that we're a few years into it with him. Tennessee, There's expectation with Nico Iamaleava. Clemson, there's expectation with Cade Klubnik. So you're seeing a trend. A lot of these teams at the top have quarterback figured out. I don't know who the quarterback's going to be for Ohio State next year. The assumption is former five-star Julian Sayin. That was very briefly at Alabama during the Nick Saban retirement, right? He bounces. As an early enrollee, he bounces. So there are a lot of questions. To me, Georgia, among all of these teams, I can sit here and pick apart. Will Penn State be able to replace its edge rushers? Will the running back duo be as good? Will they finally get receivers that are helpful? Right? Like, I can go on here and question every single one of these teams that are at the top, and I keep pointing. I'm looking at the list of the odds. Georgia has just as many of them to me as all of them. And that's just being blunt. I think Georgia has a lot of question marks. I think that I believe in a lot of the players, and I know that a lot of these players are good, but I'm curious. I think that next season is going to be very interesting. Now that we've seen a 12-team playoff and we're another year into all the craziness that the transfer portal and NIL has brought, we're going to see what some of these programs are made of, right? Which ones have to buy the rosters to succeed, which ones don't. The answer is probably going to be more people need to do that. But Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Oregon, it's the same cast of characters towards the top. When I projected in the next year, you do like Texas, and a lot of that has to do with Arch and Sarkisian and the pipeline that they got going over there. I think that it makes a lot of sense for their odds to be towards the top three. I think that I get it with Ohio State, and I get it with Georgia, and I get it with some of these schools, but the truth of the matter is the transfer portal has changed things, and we don't know what some of these rosters are going to look like in just a few months. These odds are going to shift over the next few months as we see spring games, as we see coaches move around. So Georgia getting the respect I think it's earned from a program status, and what you're going to see every year is the same thing. Georgia's going to be the top 5 of odds. I haven't seen them out of the top 3, though, in a while. And to note, thank you for watching.